Boris Johnson's row with the Church of England is not going away. That's because in a meeting with Tory MPs, he attacked the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Telegraph report, Mr. Johnson told Conservative MPs that the BBC and the Archbishop were, quote, less vociferous in their criticism of the Russian president than they were of plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Addressing Tory backbenchers at a private meeting, he said the Rwanda deal was a good policy and claimed it had been misconstrued by the BBC and senior members of the clergy. It's not made clear how it was supposedly misconstrued. I don't think the Tory press officers managed to find anything that the Archbishop of Canterbury said that was not factual. So I suppose they're saying it was misconstrued because they don't like it and we think everyone should like it. The church has hit back. They've said they have been categorical in their opposition to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So they're essentially, I think they've explicitly said actually that Boris Johnson is trying to smear them. And Keir Starmer seems to think this split between the church and the Tories could provide an opportunity for Labour. He brought the row up at PMQs.
Would the Prime Minister like to take this opportunity to apologise for slandering the Archbishop and the Church of England?
Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman. I was slightly taken aback to be Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I was slightly taken aback for the government to be criticised over the policy that we have devised to end the deaths at sea in the Channel as a result of cruel criminal gangs. I was surprised that we were attacked for that. And actually, Mr. Speaker, it turns out that policy, do you know who proposed that policy, first of all, in 2004? It was David Blunkett, Mr. Speaker, who said it was a 21st, yes it was, and she'll remember, a 21st century solution to the problems of illegal asylum seeking and immigration. He should stick with, he's a Corbynista in a smart Islington suit. That's the truth.
I think you'll find Mr. Corbyn doesn't have the whip. But I think that's a no then. Pathetic. He never takes responsibility for his words or action.
Dahlia, I want to bring you in on this because I hated everyone and everything in that clip. What did you make of it?
Look, I have to say, it is quite strange for me to actually... I think that Boris Johnson was right in that clip. By pointing out the complicity of the Labour Party in the trajectory that led us to this policy, that is historically accurate. This Rwanda policy is a policy that has been years and years in the making, and it's actually becoming increasingly standard, particularly for imperial nation states. The EU has long been making plans to outsource and externalize its border to what they call transit countries. So this latest policy is an escalation of existing trends, and it's a trend that is likely to accelerate as displacement becomes increasingly endemic in our society, whether it's because of political conflict or the knock-on effects of climate breakdown or what have you. And so all of this kind of solidarity and outrage, we needed this at the very beginning of the process in which this started to happen. And that is my frustration with the Labour Party in particular here, because the Labour Party, as Boris Johnson points out, has historically contributed to this idea that migrants are less than human, that human rights shouldn't apply to them. They began the trope of the bogus asylum seeker, which encouraged the public to view asylum seekers not as people for whom we should have empathy and solidarity, but as people that we should be suspicious of, that should be criminalized and punished. We can't forget that Labour built multiple detention centres, including Yarl's Wood, where detained pregnant women are experiencing stillbirths and miscarriages because of the appalling conditions in which they are held, all for the crime of moving to another place in order to make a better life for themselves. That's a decision that most of us in our lives will do at some point. And so that is the original sin, that creation of enclaves of exclusion in which migrants exist. That is the original sin of which this grotesque policy, which will result in the systemic and violent human rights abuses of people, is simply an escalation of what has existed before, which Labour and the Tories have both been complicit in. Boris Johnson is also right to say that Corbynism does not reflect the history of the Labour Party. And maybe if it did, we wouldn't be in this situation.
It was a super interesting exchange. I mean, as you say, Boris Johnson there did have a point. And if that was Jeremy Corbyn who he'd been speaking to, Jeremy Corbyn would have said, like, look, I agree with you on New Labour. I voted against those policies. I'm not like everyone else in this building. I am pretty consistent. A bunch of people would have got annoyed about it. A bunch of people would have been attracted to it and it would have appealed to them. On this, Keir Starmer took the opposite route, which is to, essentially say, I am aligned with New Labour and I'm nothing like Jeremy Corbyn, that guy behind me. There were lots of people, I saw lots of sort of centrists on Twitter say, oh, it was so desperate to see that Boris Johnson had said that Keir Starmer was Jeremy Corbyn in a suit. Now, I don't think Keir Starmer is Jeremy Corbyn in a suit. We've seen that is kind of the opposite of what he has proved to be. But he did actually position himself as Jeremy Corbyn with a suit. When he stood to be Labour leader, what he was saying to people was, look, what I can do is I'll keep the radicalism of Jeremy Corbyn, but what I'll do is I will dress it up in a smarter way. I will look more professional and I will be more electable, but with fundamentally quite similar politics. What did he do? He gets into power. He lets all his right-wing people take up these positions in the highest echelons of the party. And now, as he's bragging in the House of Commons, he suspended the whip from his predecessor, who he was full of praise for. Well, especially in those first leadership hustings, which we've shown you a number of times before, just because the difference between how he speaks now and how he speaks then is so striking. Where do you think this question of Boris Johnson trying to call Keir Starmer Jeremy Corbyn is going to go? I assume the strategists around Keir Starmer are pretty pleased that they can respond to this because they are pitching to a kind of voter who probably didn't like Jeremy Corbyn very much. And now they're saying, look, we've got nothing to do with the guy. We have suspended the whip. How is this going to play out, do you think?
Well, I don't think that it's going to necessarily win him many voters. I think the people that would have been won over are probably won over by the extremely harsh and outrageous way in which Jeremy Corbyn has been treated. What I think it will do is further alienate the working class people, the people of colour, the young people who were mobilised into the Labour Party project under Jeremy Corbyn, who gave their vote and trusted their vote for Keir Starmer on the grounds that he would carry forward at least some of those principles. I don't think anyone, I didn't trust him from the start. Never trust a cop. I think even the most optimistic Keir Starmer supporter didn't expect him to carry the entirety of Corbynism forward, but they expected at least some shade of it. That kind of cheap joke that really, the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn, which is an act that was a real slap in the face for a lot of those people that became engaged into the project through Corbynism, a real message that, not only are you not welcome here, but we actually have nothing but contempt for you. That process of alienating those people, of continuing to alienate those people, I don't understand how that can become part of a viable electoral strategy, because young people, working class people, people of colour have always been and are always going to be essential to an electoral victory for Labour. But now that line in the sand is being drawn real clearly. And so I don't know how that's going to play out in the next election. I don't know if that gamble is going to pay off. And I can't say that I'm particularly interested in what the Labour Party have to say at the moment.